The roar of the 1962 Ferrari 250D GTO shattered the silence of the luxury garage in Scottsdale like thunder announcing the storm. Jake Morrison, 26 years old, a mechanic with golden hands but an empty bank account, had just accomplished the impossible, resurrecting a V12 engine that Ferrari's best experts had declared irreparably dead. Billionaire William Thornton, 60 years of arrogance crystallized in a $30,000 suit, went pale watching his $40 million car return to life. But it was his daughter Sophia, 22 years of sharp beauty and Harvard MBA, who spoke the words that would collapse an empire of lies. "Dad, you lost the bet. Now keep your promise." The insane promise, made in mockery. If the mechanic could fix the unfixable, he could marry the heiress. Thornton tried to laugh, to minimize, to turn everything into a joke. But when Jake wiped his oil-stained hands and revealed that he and Sophia had been secretly in love for 3 years, the house of cards began its inevitable collapse. The Elite Performance Garage in Scottsdale, Arizona, wasn't just any shop. It was the holy grail where the world's most precious Ferraris came to be reborn, where Saudi princes and tech billionaires waited months just to have their mechanical gems blessed by the finest engine craftsmen. And among these priests of speed, against all social logic and expectation, shone Jake Morrison. Son of a Ford assembly worker and a seamstress from Detroit's rough side, Jake possessed what no fortune could buy: a supernatural talent for engines, an instinct that allowed him to feel the metallic breath of every piston, to perceive the silent suffering of every valve. His rise had begun in his uncle's shop in downtown Phoenix, among beaten Chevys and rusted Fords. But destiny had other plans when, at 18, he'd rebuilt an abandoned Ferrari 308 and made it win against modern cars. The viral video had reached Michael Chen, owner of Elite Performance, who'd pulled him from anonymity. That October morning, the atmosphere in the garage was electric. William Thornton had made his triumphant entrance with a convoy of 3 black Bentleys, bringing not only his legendary arrogance, but also the mechanical problem of the century. His 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, a 40 million jewel with museum pedigree, lay dead after the engine had failed during a charity rally in Monterey. 3 teams of Ferrari experts had examined it with the reverence of archaeologists before a sacred artifact, and the verdict had been unanimous: irreparable microfractures in the engine block, a death sentence for a V12 heart that had no replacement parts in the world. Thornton entered the garage like a Roman general in the Colosseum. His 60 years carried with the haughtiness of someone who'd built a $4 billion real estate empire, starting from a trailer park. The Tom Ford suit seemed like armor, the Richard Mille on his wrist a luxury weapon. But he wasn't alone. Sophia Thornton stepped out of the second Bentley with the grace of a gazelle and the determination of a lioness. 22 years sculpted by fortunate genetics and Harvard education, she wasn't the typical decorative heiress. Her Saint Laurent emerald suit concealed muscles toned by collegiate rowing. Her green eyes burned with an intelligence that had intimidated professors twice her age. She already managed a division of her father's empire with profits that made veteran managers pale. What transformed this scene from simple luxury repair to Shakespearean drama was the secret Jake and Sophia had guarded for 3 years like the most precious treasure. Their love had been born when she, 19, and fleeing her golden cage, had brought her Mini Cooper to a suburban shop where Jake worked the night shift. They hadn't recognized each other as mechanic and princess, but as 2 souls vibrating on the same frequency. He quoted Hemingway while changing oil. She discussed thermodynamics while he aligned wheels. They'd fallen in love between Greece and philosophy, hiding from the world in forgotten diners and small-town cafes where no one would ever look for an heiress. Chen pointed to Jake when Thornton demanded the best available mechanic. The billionaire sized him up with the same disgust he'd show a stain on his suit. A kid in dirty overalls, hands that betrayed manual labor, the antithesis of everything his world represented. Sophia intervened with surgical precision, reminding her father that talent, according to his own words, had no social class. The rhetorical trap worked. Jake approached the Ferrari with the devotion of a pilgrim. His expert hands danced over the metal, listening through touch to what others couldn't hear. After 20 minutes of silent communion with the machine, he announced he could fix it. Thornton's laugh was an explosion of incredulity. 3 Maranello teams had declared it impossible, yet this kid presumed he could perform the miracle. Jake's technical explanation left everyone speechless. He spoke of molecular fusion welding, a technique he'd secretly developed studying old Soviet manuals and quantum physics videos on YouTube. He spoke of rebalancing the crankshaft with micrometric precision, of resynchronizing the cams using algorithms he'd created. It wasn't mechanics, it was alchemy applied to metal. It was Sophia who proposed the bet, knowing her father's weakness for gambling. If Jake fixed the impossible within 8 hours, he could ask for anything. Thornton, drunk on the certainty of victory, sadistically raised the stakes with cruel humor. "If you succeed, you can even marry my daughter." The cruel laughter filled the garage, the final humiliation for the presumptuous mechanic. But in Jake and Sophia's eyes passed a flash of silent communication. They accepted the challenge, had everything put in writing in a digital contract that Thornton signed with arrogance, adding humiliating clauses for when the mechanic would lose: exile from Arizona, public apology videos, total professional destruction. At 9:17 a.m., Jake began his dance with destiny. The garage transformed into a silent arena where more than a simple repair was at stake. His hands moved with surgical precision, disassembling the engine like a Swiss watchmaker would decompose a Patek Philippe. When he reached the engine block, and everyone saw the fatal microfractures, thin as hair but lethal as daggers, the silence became tomb-like. The tool Jake extracted from his personal toolbox looked like something out of science fiction. 2 years of secret development, sleepless nights experimenting with ultrasonic frequencies and molecular resonances, all converging in this moment. For 4 hours he worked on the fractures with the concentration of a neurosurgeon, sweat beading on his forehead while his hands remained steady as rock. Sophia brought him water, brushing his fingers, small gestures that were mute declarations of love. Thornton had stopped laughing, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Veteran mechanics had gathered in religious silence, witnesses to what seemed like a technological miracle. The reassembly was a symphony of precision. Every component returned to its place with millimetric modifications Jake had calculated mentally. He altered the valve angle by half a degree, recalibrated the injection with a formula he'd seen in a dream, balanced the crankshaft using a forgotten technique from 1960s Formula One. At 4:45 p.m., with an hour and 15 minutes to spare, the engine was complete. The garage held its breath collectively when Jake sat behind the wheel. The key turned in absolute silence. Nothing. Sophia's heart stopped. Thornton began to smile. Then Jake placed his hand on the dashboard, whispering something to the car like a trainer to a wounded beast. He turned the key again. The roar that exploded was more than a sound. It was a declaration of victory, a V12 singing more powerful and pure than when it had left the factory in 1962. The garage erupted in spontaneous applause, veteran mechanics with tears in their eyes for having witnessed the impossible. Thornton was pale as a corpse, realizing he'd just lost much more than a bet. The Ferrari engine's roar still filled the air when truth exploded like a bomb. Thornton desperately tried to deny the evidence, talking about tricks, engine substitution, physical impossibility. But computers don't lie. 295 horsepower instead of 280. Emissions reduced by 30%. Instant response. The engine didn't just live, it thrived. That's when Jake dropped the atomic bomb on the billionaire's perfect life. He revealed that he and Sophia had been in love for 3 years, that they'd lived their love in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. Sophia publicly took his hand for the first time, a simple gesture containing a social revolution. The story of their secret love poured out like a flooding river. Sophia told of clandestine meetings, nights talking about impossible dreams, how Jake had loved her when he thought she was just any student, always refusing the money she wanted to give him. She told of a love built on respect and intellectual passion, not bank accounts and social status. Thornton trembled with rage, accusing Jake of seducing his daughter for money. The mechanic's response was devastating in its logic. If he'd wanted money, he would have created the scandal years earlier. Instead, he'd waited, improving himself, studying at night, preparing for this moment not to steal an heiress, but to deserve her. Thornton's lawyer confirmed the unthinkable. The contract was ironclad. Withdrawing meant reputational destruction in the business world, where given word was everything. The billionaire tried to buy Jake, 10, 20, 50 million to disappear. Every offer was refused with Olympic calm. It wasn't about money, it was about love. Richard Sterling, Thornton's rival and friend, arrived having followed everything on live stream. 70 years of entrepreneurial wisdom allowed him to see what Thornton denied.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
In Jake was a genius worth more than 10 spoiled society sons. The welding technique he'd developed could be worth hundreds of millions in the aerospace industry. Yet the kid had created it for love of cars, not money. The media explosion was immediate and devastating. The story of the mechanic and the princess conquered global imagination. Team Jake became a worldwide trend. Thornton Holdings stock lost 7% as investors feared civil war in the empire. Thornton attempted one last negotiating blow through his lawyers. He proposed a draconian prenuptial agreement. Jake would have no access to any Thornton assets, had to prove he could earn $500,000 a year within 6 months, or the marriage would be annulled. It was a trap, an impossibility for a normal mechanic. But Jake wasn't normal. He accepted, raising the stakes. $1 million in 3 months instead of $500,000 in 6. Then he revealed his secret arsenal. Years of innovations never patented for fear they'd be stolen. An energy recovery system that increased electric car range by 40%. Carbon ceramic brakes that cost 1/10. Revolutionary predictive diagnostic software. Sterling was first to understand the potential. He offered immediate partnership, $2 million advance, guaranteed royalties, total legal support. Within a week, offers exploded. Tesla called personally. Ferrari sent delegations. In a month, Jake had contracts for $15 million. But Sophia didn't stand idle. She launched Luxury Garage, a chain of luxury shops with the Morrison method. The idea was brilliantly simple. Bring Jake's mechanical excellence to global scale while maintaining 5-star hotel standards. In 3 weeks, she raised $20 million in funding from investors who smelled gold. Thornton watched helplessly as his world turned upside down. The mechanic he'd despised was becoming the wunderkind of automotive innovation. His daughter was demonstrating entrepreneurial abilities that eclipsed many of his managers. And worse, the public adored them while he became the fairy tale villain. 2 months after the bet, the landscape had completely changed. Jake continued working as a mechanic 3 days a week, refusing to abandon the oil-stained hands that kept his genius alive. Sophia had transformed Luxury Garage into a global phenomenon with 3-month waiting lists. Thornton didn't surrender easily. He began an underground war using every contact, every favor accumulated in 40 years of business. He pressured suppliers, attempted hostile acquisitions of patents through shell companies, spread false rumors about Jake's work quality. The lowest blow came on a February evening. 3 men attacked Jake in a parking garage, aiming for his golden hands. But years of physical labor and teenage boxing saved the mechanic, who knocked down 2 attackers before the third fled. Sophia found him in the hospital with his hand bandaged, ligaments damaged but not torn. 6 weeks of forced rest. That's when Jake and Sterling discovered Thornton's vulnerability. The billionaire's empire was a house of cards. Failed investments in China, billion-dollar lawsuits in Argentina, liquidity crisis. With profits from patents and luxury garage, plus support from investors Sterling convinced, they assembled $500 million, enough to buy 35% of Thornton Holdings' debt. The operation was conducted in secret through offshore companies and nominees. Sophia orchestrated the financial maneuvers with competence that stunned even Wall Street veterans. In 2 weeks, they controlled enough debt to destroy the Thornton empire with a phone call. On the day of final confrontation, Thornton was urgently summoned to his own board of directors. He found Jake seated at the head of the table, Sophia to his right, Sterling to his left. The mechanic controlled the fate of a $4 billion empire. But instead of destroying, Jake offered salvation. He would save the company, inject fresh capital, create an automotive division that would triple the value. In exchange, he wanted only one thing: marriage to Sophia, publicly blessed. It was mercy where vengeance was expected, greatness where Thornton had sown pettiness. The night that followed was the longest of William Thornton's life. Locked in his study, he stared at the photo of his dead wife, Margaret, who smiled from a silver frame. She would have understood what he'd forgotten, that love was worth more than any empire. For the first time in 10 years, the billionaire wept. He wept for the pride that had blinded him, for almost destroying his daughter's happiness, for becoming exactly the kind of man he'd sworn as a youth never to be. The morning press conference shocked the world. Thornton publicly admitted his mistake, praised Jake's talent and integrity, declared him more than worthy of Sophia. He announced the merger of Thornton Holdings and Sterling Morrison Enterprises, with Sophia as CEO and Jake as technical director. It was total surrender, transforming into rebirth. The wedding was held at Elite Performance Garage, transformed for the occasion into a cathedral of mechanics. Ferraris arranged in a circle like metallic witnesses. The 250 GTO that had started everything decorated with white ribbons. 200 guests, impossibly mixed mechanics and billionaires, students and Arab princes. Jake waited in an elegant black silk mechanic suit created by Armani. Sophia appeared in a white suit, with Ferrari red details and custom sneakers reading Mrs. Mechanic. It wasn't a marriage between different classes. It was the union of 2 equal souls. During the reception, Jake announced the creation of the Morrison Foundation. Every year, it would fund education for 100 children of workers. The first to applaud was Thornton, standing with sincere vigor. It was redemption through humility. 5 years later, the world had changed. Morrison Thornton Enterprises was worth $10 billion, global leader in sustainable innovation. Jake's technologies had democratized electric cars and made supercars ecological. Sophia was the youngest female CEO in the Fortune 500. Luxury Garage had 200 global locations. Their estate in Paradise Valley was a living paradox. Half minimalist luxury, half high-tech garage. In the garage, next to million-dollar Ferraris, still sat the old family Honda. Jake was teaching little William, 4 years old, how a toy engine worked. The boy had inherited his mother's green eyes and his father's skilled hands. Sophia, 7 months pregnant, had just closed the acquisition of a revolutionary battery startup. On the desk, the wedding photo from the garage next to the recent one of Jake receiving the Nobel Prize for Technological Innovation. William Thornton, transformed into an affectionate grandfather, entered without knocking to announce that the Speed for All project was approved. Affordable garages with advanced technology and accessible prices. Jake's dream of giving dignity to manual labor was becoming reality. He confessed that the mechanic had taught him the most important lesson. Talent truly had no social class, and he'd been on the wrong side of the barricade. When Sophia revealed that the baby girl on the way would be named Margaret, like her grandmother, the billionaire who'd almost destroyed everything for pride wept with pure joy. That evening, during dinner in the large kitchen, Jake had insisted on a space where everyone could cook together. Michael Chen brought his homemade wine to toast the most famous garage in the world and the most improbable marriage in history. They found little William under the Ferrari 250 GTO with a toy screwdriver, listening to the car's heart, as Daddy had taught him. 3 generations united by an impossible bet, by a love that had defied every convention, by a Ferrari that had played mechanical Cupid. That night, with Sophia asleep on his shoulder, Jake reflected on the paradox of their story. The billionaire who'd laughed at the possibility of a mechanic marrying his daughter couldn't imagine that very mechanic would save his empire, multiply his fortune, and most importantly, bring joy back to his family. Outside, in the silent garage, the Ferrari 250 GTO rested like a red metal sphinx. The engine Jake had resurrected still beat perfectly, eternal witness to a modern fairy tale where the prince was a mechanic, the princess an entrepreneur, and the dragon to defeat was nothing but pride and prejudice. Little William, found still in the garage at dawn, slept hugging the Ferrari's wheel. In his child's dreams, engines sang stories of a time when his father had won the impossible, not with a sword, but with a wrench, not in battle, but in a garage, not to conquer a kingdom, but to marry the love of his life. And as the sun rose over Scottsdale, gilding the roofs of the garages where four-wheeled dreams were born, Jake Morrison held his family, knowing he'd proven the simplest and most revolutionary truth, that a man is worth what he can do with his hands and love with his heart, not the numbers in his bank account. The Ferrari 250 GTO, in its metallic silence, seemed to smile. It had done its part in bringing together 2 worlds that seemed irreconcilable, proving that sometimes, to repair a fracture, you just need the right touch and the love of someone who can see beyond appearances. Just like repairing an impossible marriage required only a brave mechanic and a rebel princess, united by the only aristocracy that truly matters, that of authentic passion. Hit like if you believe love has no social classes. Comment with the part that moved you most. Share to celebrate those who fight prejudice for love. Subscribe for more stories of impossible challenges won with heart. Because sometimes, to fix a 40 million Ferrari, you need a garage mechanic. And sometimes, to win a princess, you just need to love her when you don't even know who she is. But always, always, a man's true value is measured by what he's willing to risk for what he loves.